All right, guys, welcome back to What Could Go Wrong. So today we're going to be doing our tier list for the season. I know I've done a little bit of like week to week, but I think we're far enough along in the season that we can do an actual tier list and we can actually get this up off the ground and get it going. All right. So I am going to be ranking all of the specs, and with that being said, there comes a disclaimer. All right. So just a disclaimer, all in all, left to right does not really mean anything. Okay. Um, I'm just kind of going in order here. So left to right doesn't matter. And I'm also going to say that a lot of these specs are really, really close. So don't think that just because one spec gets a little bit is doing a little bit better, it makes them better. A lot of this tier list is going into uh, IO score. It's going into how many higher end keys are they doing? What is their really just like how popular spec is it? And I'm also pulling from the kind of the top 50 runs off of Raider.io. See, I have all my tabs up here. So first we'll be pulling popularity and also representation. And then here you'll see average IO scores and really where are they being ranked in overall, like what is their rating, the top rating for the season. Okay. Next up, go ahead and talk about our ranking system. Okay. So first up, in the S tier position, we have the best of the bunch. All right. This is literally like the best specs so far. Next, we have the specs in the A tier slot. We have the specs that they're doing good, but they're just not quite there yet for some reason. Okay. Then we have the middle of the pack. They're not bad. They're not the best. They're not the worst. They're just good. Okay. And then we have not great, that they're just kind of struggling. They're not doing the best. And then we have hot dog water. These are the specs that are they're just awful, or they're doing awful, I should say. Okay. Now, with that being said, let's jump into it. First up, we have Vengeance Demon Hunter. So, Vengeance Demon Hunter, we see is the most popular tank. We see that they are represented in this just the top 40 runs. It's almost completely purple. All right. Then, if we go here, they have the highest average IO by a little over 100 points. They are at the top of the rankings here for M plus. So that is going to earn them their position in best of the bunch. All right. Next up is going to be our Protection Warrior. They are very much in the middle of the pack. We do see some representation of them here just in these top 40 runs. If we look at the next one, see we've got some pretty good representation for them. Okay. If we look up here, popularity, like I said, middle of the pack, and we look here, they're the fourth highest average IO. Now, with that being said, given the state of Guardian right now, given the state of Brewmaster right now, that really doesn't put them at the highest ranking. They're just not doing great. Most of the changes that we've seen to Protection Warrior and the issues that we have seen them have over the expansion really is going to put them in A tier. They're doing great, but they're not the best. Okay. Next up is Protection Paladin. So Protection Paladin is the second most popular tank, but we do not see any Protection Paladins in the top 50 runs. Even if we keep going past, we don't see one until the 79th run. So either they're not logging their stats or they're not doing great. But they barely make it into the top 80, which does kind of put them a little bit lower. And then also them being the second highest average IO score. So it's going to put them in A tier, but I would say that they are not performing nearly as good as what we saw last season. And I would say that they are not performing well enough to be approaching the higher end of the tier list. So I think that they are very much going to be an A tier. And I think that if Protection Paladins are not careful, they are going to drop off into the B tier. Okay. Next up is Blood DK. So this is actually my main for the season. They are the third most popular tank. We don't see um, any of them until the 55th run. So they are in the top 60 of runs, but they're not really there all the way. If we look over here, they only have the third highest average IO score. They're not doing the best overall, but they are also far from the worst. Okay. So I would say that they are doing a little bit better than Protection Paladin. Probably not as good as Protection Warrior, but they are very, very close. Um, I think that if these changes keep happening to Protection Warriors, I think that we're going to see a rise of Blood DK. I think that Blood DK has a very, very real possibility of becoming one of the better tanks for the season. Um, Given the changes that happened today, I'm not really sure what's going to happen with Vengeance. I'm not sure if they're going to fall off any, if those nerfs that they took did anything for them. Um, so we'll just have to wait and see. All right, so next up is going to be Guardian Druid. So Guardian Druid is very much suffering from the fact that Balance, Feral, and Resto are all really good. Um, they are the second most least popular tank. We see Squish Vegan and his crew pushing runs, but we really don't see any other representation. We have two different types of warriors, but we really don't see any other guardian druids. Okay. And then if we also jump over here and look, we see that they have among the lowest. Guardian struggling from popularity, but I think the Guardian as a spec is just not in a great place. So it's going to put them into a B tier. They are not bad. They're not terrible, but they're also not that great. All right. And then Brewmaster Monk, the least most popular tank. No representation in the top 80 of runs. Performing the worst on IO scores is going to put them into a B tier status. They're not bad, but they're not doing great. I think that they're struggling right now from the fact that one, Mistweaver is doing phenomenal, but also the fact that Brewmaster needs, we got the button bloat rework and that helps us a lot, but I think that in and of itself, Brewmaster just needs an entire talent rework. They need something that sets them apart, and they don't honestly have that right now. And I think that is really overall what is hurting them the most. And I think that's what's holding them back from moving into anywhere. Honestly, I think that Brewmaster is barely in the not bad category. I think the fact that you can hit a 3K IO is the only thing keeping them into the not bad territory. But overall, it's just not a great tank this expansion. They haven't been doing very well for a while. So, but all right, let's move on into the ranged DPS. All right. So first up, we have Fire Mage. So right now, Fire Mage is represented in probably 25, well, no, I would say 50% of the top runs. They're the second most popular of the range DPS. And if we look right here, they are currently holding out at the number one of all DPS spot. They are pushing that 32 average IO. So in all, that's going to earn Fire its place in S tier. Given what Fire Mages went through last season, I honestly can't even say that I'm really mad about this. Given the fact that I don't play Fire Mage, it does kind of make me a little bit salty. But next up is going to be Frost. So Frost Mages, they are kind of very much in the middle as far as population goes. They're not up top, but they're also not at the very bottom. If we look over here, Frost Mages are still hitting that 3K. They're in the top 20 of the best DPS averages. So that is going to earn Frost a place in the middle of the pack, not doing bad, but they are also not that great. They are being outshined by Fire Mage, but not to a point where they don't exist. There are Frost Mage runs in the top. Right here, we see there's a Frost Mage run on a plus 17 Dark Flame Cref, which is number 2 run in the world right now. So we do see representation. We are seeing them pushing those hierarchies, and they are doing, overall, they're doing all right. Now let's look at Arcane. Before we get too much into it, I'm just going to put them right there. So I have been playing a little bit of Arcane this season. Overall, Arcane just feels very weak. It's the power behind your hits. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. Doesn't really feel like anything is changing with my rotation. I mean, it's just Arcane just feels like it's in a very rough spot power wise. We also see that they are one of the least most popular specs being played right now. There are 0 Arcane Mages in the top 50 runs. And if we look over here, we see that they're in the 25. They're not averaging a 3k IO. So in and of itself, they are really just not doing very good this season. Given that they had the cake last season, I think that it's a good balance, but I also think that it is overbalanced, and I think that Arcane, all the changes they've made, I think it is really, really bad to play Arcane right now, and I think that even with the buffs that they got today, I just don't think it's enough to really make Arcane the best. All right. Next up, we have Balance Druid. So come over here, scroll back up. Balance is the number 2 DPS in the world right now. They're averaging the second best IO score, less than 100 points behind Fire Mages. We look over here, we see that they are the third most popular range spec. And if we look here, we're seeing balance, 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 balance. Balance Druid is in all but 2 of the top 10 highest timed keys for the season. So that is going to earn them their place in S tier. All right. Next up is Beast Mastery Hunter. So if we look, Beast Mastery is the number 1 most popular of the ranged DPS. You can see we have a Beast Mastery on the number 2 timed run. And then we actually don't see another one again until the 14th, right? So I think the Beast Mastery is doing very, very well right now. I think that they are very popular. I think that they have the best survivability of the hunter specializations. I think that they have a lot that they offer the group, especially with a lust. But I think that the fact that Mage is doing so well right now, I think that really kind of throws them out of the runnings. All right. But overall, they're doing phenomenal. We come over here, they're actually only in the top 8 of the highest average IO scores. Okay. But if we look at the ranged portion, then that automatically jumps them up to, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're in the top 5 for the ranged DPS. Okay. In and of itself, it is going to put them into the doing great category. I think that Beast Mastery Hunter is doing really, really well. And I think that they have the potential to continue. And I think if anything, if for any reason anything happens to Fire Mage, I think that Beast Mastery is going to take that place. Okay. Next up, we have Marksmanship. Okay. Marksmanship is very much in the bottom. Um, they are one of the least most popular range specs. We see they have 113 run, and then we don't really see them again for a while. Even if we come look over here, they're in the 21st position for average IO, putting them even behind Frost Mage. They're only averaging 3k IO, and when you put all that together, it really puts them, they're just not doing great. I don't think that this rework has done good things for marksmanship. I don't think that the fact that the hero talents are not great is doing good things for marksmanship. They're just very much struggling. They need a real rework. They need things to be fixed. Because having a spec that's not doing great and is also not a lot of fun to play, unless you're somebody who just plays marksmanship, I don't really think that you're going to be doing a whole lot with MM for the foreseeable future. Okay. Next up, we have the Warlocks. So if we look, we have Destruction first, the most popular of the 3 Warlock specs. It is one of the, actually, no, it's kind of in the middle as far as popularity goes for the range specs. We don't see a whole lot of representation of Warlocks in these top runs. Actually, we don't even see a Warlock until the 51st run, and that's a Demonology Warlock, okay? So in and of itself, Warlocks are not really doing the best right now. If we scroll up and we look, Destruction, Destruction is the highest of the 3 Warlock specs, and it's not even in the top 10. But they are holding that 3,100 average IO. But just a lack of representation, the lower popularity is going to earn them their not bad spot. Okay. Next up is going to be Affliction. So we see that Affliction is the least most popular spec. Again, no real representation. And it is currently the lowest of the Warlock specs, barely holding a 3k IO. Affliction is a great spec to play, and it's a lot of fun, but it really falls off in the high end keys, and it doesn't do well in the low end keys because of the way their damage works. The reality of it is Affliction needs to be fixed. Right now, Vile Taint not pairing up with your Corruption, having to tap target Corruption on targets, and then your Vile Taint comes up, and then it's just like, oh my god. In and of itself, not a great spec. Not doing great. It is in need of a rework. It needs help. It is unfortunately going to go into the not great category. All right. Next up, Demonology. Still a little bit low on the range, but doing better than Affliction. Dead center of the 3 Warlock specs. And if we look here, they are currently holding that 3,100 IO. Demonology, it's doing well. It's being outshined by Destruction for sure, but they're doing well. I've heard a lot of people saying that it just doesn't feel as impactful. I've been running with some Demonology Warlocks, and they seem to be doing okay. So it's going to go into the not bad category. Next up, we have Devastation Evoker. Sitting right here in the top 15, around that 3,100 average IO. Seeing pretty low popularity and representation, and then we don't see them in the top 50. Devastation has good damage, but they're just not doing all that great. So it is going to put them into the not great category, unfortunately. Really, I think a big thing with Devastation is like they're squish buckets for one. They don't do enough damage, and they don't really bring a whole lot to the group as far as what the group needs. Okay. Next up is Augmentation. Augmentation evokers are they're rough. They're in a horrible position. They have almost no representation in Mythic Plus. There aren't even enough people playing it to give it the average IO. It's the worst of the DPS specs. Augmentation is hot dog water. Rest in peace. Moving on. Next up we have Elemental. So Elemental is very much middle of the pack as far as representation goes. We see some Elementals here along the way. They have pretty good representation in these top runs. They're doing pretty good. If we check it out here, they are fourth of all DPS, holding that 32 IO. They're in a very good position. They're doing very, very well right now. That's going to earn them their position in the S tier. Okay. Next up is Shadow Priest. So Shadow Priest is in a weird place where they're better than Holy Priest, but they're not as good as Disciplined Priest, but they offer the same thing as the Disciplined Priest, and they have an interrupt, whereas a Disciplined Priest doesn't. So like they're kind of both doing really, really well. So really what we're seeing is they're kind of in that middle of the pack because healers are always going to be more important. We don't see their representation except we see it in 11. There's 2. It's just not a whole lot of representation. There is a little bit in these top runs, but we see more representation from other specs. Unfortunately, of all the DPS, they are only 7th place at 31. So it's very difficult to rank Shadow Priest because Shadow Priest has the potential, the ability to be one of the best DPS that we have, but they're being outshined and Discipline is just more popular. Okay. So in reality, I would say Shadow Priest is an S tier, but I also think it would be justified to put them into A tier. Okay. I think just because of like the facts of the situation, we are going to go into the S tier with them. I think that Discipline gets knocked off by a peg. I think that Shadow Priest is going to be the most popular of the priest specs. Okay. Next up, we have Fury Warriors. All right. So Fury right now is currently holding the highest percentage. They are doing among the best. Even if we look over here, they're still performing at that 3K, but they run into the same problem. Arms and Fury both run into the same problem. Okay. And even if we look at Arms, Arms is pretty decent popularity. They're literally they're doing better than Fury Warrior as far as average IO goes, but Warriors just don't bring anything to the group. So I'm gonna put both of them into the not bad tier because they're doing good. They're okay, but they're not giving you anything really. And even if we look, we've got a Fury Warrior and two Fury Warriors. Looks like yeah, so we've got some representation from Fury in these high end runs, but like the representation is coming from a group that doesn't play a specific comp, they just play what they play. And I mean, if we really just look like we're just not you're not seeing a whole lot of warriors doing that great right now. Um but they're not bad because obviously they're pushing some high end keys. So they're not bad, but they're also not great. So they're just kind of sitting in like that little middle area there. Okay. Next up is Subtlety Rogue. Subtlety is currently in the dead center of the rogues. They're sitting in the 15th position. They're holding that 31 IO. They're doing overall, they are doing really well. They're doing some good damage. They're pushing out high numbers. It's going to put them in the not bad category. Okay. Next up is Assassination Rogues. Assassination is currently the most popular of the rogue specs. We're seeing pretty good representation. Or well, we were. Yeah, it looks like Assassination doesn't quite have as much as it did the other day when I was looking at all this. They do have pretty good representation. They are holding that 3100 IO. They are sitting in the top in the 17th position. So they're not perfect, they're not great, but they are doing pretty good. Um, so it's gonna put them in the not bad category. Outlaw, lowest representation of all the melee classes. They're the lowest represented. They're sitting barely over a 3K IO. They're going to drop into the not great category. Okay. So that's the rogue specs. All in all, like the rogues are not as important this season, I don't think, as they were last season. Um, I mean, off the top of my head, I can really only think of one or two situations when I would want to have a rogue. But overall, yeah, there's just not a big need for rogues this season. Okay. So next up, we have Enhancement Shaman. Enhancement is definitely being outshined by Elemental, but not by much. We actually see that Enhancement is in the number 6 position, which is only 2 places behind Elemental. They are less than 100 points behind them as far as average IO goes. Popularity, they're virtually like right at the same thing. They have good representation. It is only because there is a little bit more representation for Elemental in the high keys. It's going to put Enhancement into the doing great tier. They're doing very, very well. There's not as much need for their utility this season as well. But overall, they're still a solid class to have. Next up is Feral Druid. Feral is actually in the lower end, not the lowest, but the lower end of representation. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of balance in Resto Druids in these high runs. Even if we look here, Feral is still in the top 10. They're holding that 3100 IO. So all in all, I'm going to put Feral into the doing great category. They're not nearly as good as Boomkin. They're not as bad as Guardian, but they are there in the middle, and that puts them right here. Next up, we have Frost Death Knight. So Frost Death Knight is definitely fallen off a lot. We don't really see very much representation of them, if any, in these high-end runs. So they're not pushing the high keys. Even coming over here and looking, like, Frost is sitting in the 22 spot, barely averaging 36. Overall, it's going to put them in the not great category. Okay. Unholy, on the other hand, Unholy is represented in, I would say, probably 75% of these groups. Almost all of them. They're among the higher represented in the DPS tiers. They are holding on to number 3 spot for that 3200 average IO. Unholy is definitely going to go into the S tier. They are doing astronomically good this season. They're doing phenomenal overall. Okay. Next up is going to be Havoc. Havoc is the second highest represented melee DPS. We are not seeing a lot of them in these high end keys because we're seeing a lot of Vengeance. So there is a little bit of outshining there. If we come look, they are in that top 10 of that 3100 IO. Overall, Havoc is doing insane amounts of damage. But just because of being outshined, it's going to put them in the doing great category. They don't have anything that makes them better than Vengeance, and they are not really worse than Vengeance, but I think that they are sitting just a little bit lower only based off of representation and popularity. Okay. And next up, we have Retribution Paladin. The most popular, almost zero Retribution Paladins in these high-end runs. Overall, they're sitting in the top 5, 3200 IO. I am going to say that Retribution Paladin is going to be in the S tier. The only thing that they are missing is their representation. But again, if people are not logging their runs, if they're not linked in, it would make sense. But overall, it is a phenomenal spec. They do insane amounts of damage. They have insane amount of utility. They're just amazing to have as a part of the group, and they're really outshining the other specs this season. So next up is going to be Survival Hunter. Survival is not even hitting a 3k IO. They're 2.7% of the representation. There is zero representation for several of the top runs. They're ultimately just a very weak spec. They're really not doing damage outside of their cooldowns. They're not doing great at all. In and of themselves, I would say that they are a hot dog water spec, unfortunately. Okay. So next up, we have Windwalker Monk. So if we look, Windwalker is actually among the higher represented in here. We see a Windwalker, another one. They've got good representation at these the higher end keys and the top runs. Even in the rankings, they're sitting at 12. They're holding that 3100 IO average. So in reality, they are doing very, very good, which is going to earn them their spot of doing great. All right. So healers are, for the most part, very split. They're doing good or they're not. Okay. So first up, we have Discipline Priest. So Discipline is the most popular of the healers. They have essentially they have quite a bit of representation in the top runs. They're holding the highest average IO. I don't think anybody is surprised into the S tier. Okay. Holy, on the other hand, Holy is not hitting that 3k IO. They're one of the lower represented healers. We don't see any in the top runs. Holy is actually going to drop into not great. I think that they're okay, but they're not good enough to keep up with. Okay. Next up, we have Holy Paladin. They're slightly more popular than the Holy Priest. We do have Ellesmere running his for one of the top 40 runs. And then we see him again in the top 50. But outside of Ellesmere, we're not seeing the Holy Paladin enough. If you look here, they're in the top 5. They're still not hitting that 3K IO. They're not doing great. They're also going to go in the not great category. Okay. Next up, we have Mistweaver Monk. I almost said Holy Monk. Wow. All right, so the Holy Monks are actually the second most represented. We see several of them throughout these top runs. We see they are holding that 32. They're not even 100 points, not even 50 points behind where Discipline is sitting. So overall, Mistweaver is going to land in the S tier. All right. Next up, we have Preservation Evoker. Preservation is the least most popular. No representation in high-end keys. The lowest of the IO score averages for healers. Preservation is hot dog. Anyway, moving on. We have Restoration Druid. So I'm just like renaming all of the healers. Okay, so we have Discipline Priest, we have Holy Monk, Holy Paladin, Holy Monks, oh, Restoration Restoration Druids, what I call it. Recreational Druids, I don't know. But anyways, Restoration Druids. All right, so we do see some pretty good representation of Resto Druid in these high keys. We're seeing they're hitting that 31 IO. They're doing all in all pretty great. Earn their spot and doing great. All right. Last but not least, we have Restoration Shaman. So they are hitting that 3100 IO average. They're the third most popular of the healers. They are getting some showtime in these top runs. We see a couple of them. Most of them are going to be in the higher or the lower of the top runs. But all in all, Restoration Shaman is going to be doing great. So with that being said, that is the official tier list of how everything is sitting right now. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree. If you like the video, please like, subscribe to the channel. Yeah, we'll see you guys next time.